I'll never forget the moment the phone rang that night. It was one of those old landline, kind that barely gets used anymore, especially now with everyone on their cell phone. But there it was, shrill and piercing, slicing through the quiet of our living room like a knife. Who the hell could be calling at this hour? I muttered under my breath. My wife, Laura, was beside me on the couch, her eyes glued to the TV, but she jumped at the sound. We both knew it wasn't going to be good news. Those late-night calls never are. I picked up the receiver, my hand trembling slightly, and answered. Hello? For a moment, there was nothing but static, then a faint voice on the other end. A voice that made my blood run cold. It was soft, barely a whisper, unmistakable. Dad? I felt the world spin. That voice couldn't be. Dad, it's me. No, it wasn't possible. I looked over at Laura, who was staring at me now, her face as pale as a ghost. You must have heard it too. It was our daughter, but that made no sense. Been gone for 15 years. Jessica? I croaked, my throat suddenly dry. Is that you? Yes, Dad, it's me. I've missed you. My heart pounded in my chest. I felt sick, dizzy. This wasn't real. Couldn't be. Jessica was gone, and we had buried the past, literally. Laura clutched my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Where are you? I asked, not even sure why I was entertaining this madness. Part of me wanted to hang up, but another part, a twisted, guilty part, needed to hear more. I'm close, she said. I'm coming home. I dropped the phone like it was on fire, the sound of her voice echoing in my ears. Laura was trembling beside me, tears welling in her eyes. We didn't need to say it out loud. We both knew what was really going on. 15 years ago, Jessica had vanished. That's what everyone else believed, what we'd told them. But the truth was so much darker, so much worse. It started when she was 13. Jessica had always been a difficult child, moody, temperamental, but nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. At least, not at first. But then she changed. She became cold, calculating, with a cruel streak that frightened us. It was like she enjoyed seeing people suffer. At school, she got into fights, hurt other kids. We tried to get her help, counseling, therapy, but nothing worked. It just got worse. Then one day, I found something in her room that shook me to my core. Evidence that she'd been hurting more than just animals. I won't go into the details, but it was bad. Real bad. She'd taken the lives of 2 of her classmates. No remorse, no guilt. Just a twisted sense of satisfaction. We didn't go to the police. How could we? She was our daughter. She was also a monster. We were terrified of her. Every day was a nightmare, never knowing what she'd do next. And then it got worse. She started tormenting us, playing sick games. She'd disappear for days, only to reappear like nothing had happened. She threatened her little brother Danny more than once, and we knew we had to do something. We couldn't live like this anymore. So, one night, we made a decision. Terrible, awful decision. We had to protect Danny, protect ourselves. We took her out into the woods, deep where no one would find us. And we did what we had to do. We buried her there in the cold, dark earth and told everyone she'd run away. It was supposed to be over. But now, 15 years later, here she was, calling us from beyond the grave. The rest of the night was a blur. Laura and I didn't sleep. How could we? Every creak, every rustle outside made our hearts race. We kept expecting to see her, standing in the doorway, her eyes full of hate. But the night passed and nothing happened. We tried to convince ourselves it was a prank, some sick joke. But deep down, we knew better. The next day, things got stranger. I saw her, or at least I thought I did. A silhouette in the window of our neighbor's house, just standing there, staring at me. I blinked, and she was gone. Then, later, a knock at the door. A slow, deliberate knock that sent chills down my spine. But when I opened it, no one was there. Laura and I were losing it, that much was clear. We couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe us? So we just sat in the living room, waiting for her to come home. 2 days passed before we got the second call. This time, it was Laura who answered. Her face went white as she listened. Then she handed the phone to me, too terrified to speak. "Dad?" Jessica's voice came through the receiver, calm, almost cheerful. "I'm coming home tonight. Are you ready to see me?" I hung up without saying a word. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. Laura was crying now, rocking back and forth, her eyes wide with fear. We knew what we had to do. We had to leave. Get out of the house, get as far away as possible. But something stopped us. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was fear. I don't know, but we stayed. That night we sat in the dark, waiting. Every hour felt like an eternity. The house was deathly quiet, not even the usual hum of the refrigerator or the ticking of the clock, just silence. We didn't talk, didn't move, we just waited. Then, just after midnight, we heard it. The sound of a car pulling up in the driveway. My heart stopped. I looked at Laura, her face frozen in terror. We didn't dare move. The headlights flashed through the window, illuminating the room for a brief second, and then darkness. We sat in the dark, paralyzed by fear. The only sound our ragged breathing. The car had pulled into the driveway, its engine rumbling like some beast waiting to pounce. Neither of us could muster the courage to move, to even look out the window. I wanted to believe this was all a nightmare, something I could wake up from. But the truth was sinking in, suffocating us both. Laura clung to my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice trembling with terror. I have to see," I stammered, though every fiber of my being screamed for me to stay put. But I couldn't just sit there, waiting for whatever horror was coming. I had to confront it, even if it killed me. "Stay here," I told Laura, prying her hand off my arm. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but didn't try to stop me. I stood up, legs trembling beneath me, as I made my way to the door. Each step felt like walking through thick mud, my heart pounding in my ears. I reached for the doorknob, hesitating for just a second before opening the door. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face. The headlights from the car in the driveway blinded me for a moment, making me shield my eyes. But then, as I adjusted to the light, I saw her. I saw Jessica. She was sitting in the driver's seat, her head tilted to the side, looking directly at me. My breath caught in my throat. It was her, but not as I remembered. No, this wasn't my little girl. This was something else. Something twisted and wrong. Her skin was pale, almost gray, stretched tight over her bones, corpse long dead. Her once vibrant hair hung in limp, matted clumps, and her eyes... God, her eye. They were empty, hollow sockets staring into nothing, yet somehow I felt her gaze piercing through me. The flesh on her cheeks was rotting away, revealing patches of bone underneath. The smell hit me then, the overwhelming stench of decay, of death. I wanted to run, to get as far away from her as possible, but my feet were rooted to the ground. She smiled, grotesque, unnatural grin, twisted her decayed features into something monstrous. "Dad," she rasped, her voice the same as on the phone, but somehow worse now that I was seeing her in the flesh, or what was left of it. "I told you I was coming home." My eyes were drawn to the passenger seat, where something even more horrifying caught my gaze. There, slumped lifelessly beside her, was Danny, my sweet, dear son. His body was twisted unnaturally, his face frozen in an expression of terror. His skin was pale, his lips blue. I could see the marks around his neck, the telltale signs of strangulation. Jessica had gotten to him first. I staggered back, a cry escaping my lips. "No, no, no, no!" I shouted, my voice breaking, my heart shattering into a million pieces. This couldn't be real. Couldn't be happening. But there he was, my son, murdered by his sister. And there she was, a walking corpse grinning at me from the driver's seat. I looked back at the house where Laura was still inside, oblivious to the horror in the driveway. She needed to see this, needed to understand what was happening. But how could I make her see? How could I make her believe that this was real? I turned back to Jessica, who was still watching me, her grin widening, as if relishing my pain. The headlights flickered for a moment, casting her face in shadow before illuminating it again, making her look even more nightmarish. "Why?" I choked out, the word barely escaping my lips. "Because you tried to get rid of me," she hissed, her voice a mix of anger and amusement. "But I'm still here, Dad. I'll always be here. You can't get rid of me that easily." She leaned forward, her bony hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that I could hear the creak of her decaying joints. "Come closer, Dad," she whispered. "Come see what you've done." I took a step back, shaking my head, unable to tear my eyes away from the grotesque sight in front of me. This was my fault. All of it. I had tried to bury the past. It had come back, crawling out of the grave to destroy what little I had left. "Laura!" I screamed, finally finding my voice. "Laura, come out here." I heard her footsteps behind me, hesitant at first, then faster as she realized something was wrong. She appeared at the door, her face contorted with fear and confusion. "What's going on? What's happening?" she asked, voice quivering. I pointed to the car, unable to say anything. She stepped forward, her eyes widening as she took in the scene before her. Her hand flew to her mouth, a strangled cry escaping her throat. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh my God, no." She started to collapse and I rushed to catch her, pulling her into my arms as she sobbed uncontrollably. Together, we stared at the nightmare in front of us. Our dead daughter sitting in the car, our dead son beside her. "We have to leave," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "We have to get out of here now." But before we could move, the headlights flickered again, and the car engine roared to life. Jessica's face twisted into a snarl as she slammed her foot on the gas. The car lunged forward, tires screeching against the pavement. I pushed Laura out of the way, shouting for her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The car sped towards me, the headlights blinding, the roar of the engine deafening. In those last moments, all I could see was Jessica's face, her decayed, rotting face, grinning at me with that unnatural, grotesque smile. Closed my eyes, bracing for the impact, my mind overwhelmed with terror and guilt. The sound of the car barreling towards me filled my ears, drowning out everything else. And then, silence. The world went black. But in that darkness, I could still see her face, still hear her voice whispering in my ear. "You can't get rid of me, Dad. I'm home now, forever." And then there was nothing.